there's the Norloch on one side, and the Flodden Wall on the other 3. This is that wall. Now it doesn't look like very much, but it was originally about twice as high, and it was built after the Battle of Flodden Fields in the 1300s. This was a battle between the Scottish and the English. Again, we don't really get on. And this one, the Scottish won. Now we don't get to say that very often, so when we do, we're quite proud. Round of applause, everybody. Alright, so we won the Battle of Flodden Field. And then we realised what we'd done. We'd beaten the English in field combat and we'd won. So they were definitely coming after us. So the Scottish ran as fast as they possibly could back to Edinburgh, where they said to the council, "Oh God, the English are coming." The council said, "Alright, what are we going to do about it?" The people said, "Well, we'll build a wall. A defence wall to stop the English from coming in." And that they did. But Edinburgh Council doesn't do anything fast either.
Or free.
Or for free, exactly. Fast nor free. Took them 30 years to build the wall. Yeah. It was twice as high as it is now, but that's still a long time. Okay? 30 years. If the English had been coming there and then, wouldn't have done them much good. And when the English eventually did arrive here, 100 years later, they came in through the front gates because somebody left it unlocked. Okay. If you're going to build a massive wall around your city, lock the gates. That's like rule number 1. Okay, so everything on this side of the wall is within city limits, everything on the other side is not. We started on one side of the city and we've walked the whole way across. Okay, that's the old town city of Edinburgh. Right. In this small area, there were 40,000 people living. Okay, crammed in and packed one on top of the other. They needed somewhere to bury their dead, and this was the best place. Everything on this side of the wall was consecrated ground, everything on the other was not. Once we buried on consecrated ground, it guaranteed you a safe passage unto whatever came next, be it heaven, some form of an afterlife. But only the rich were buried here. It was too expensive. The poor were buried on the other side of the wall in paupers' graves, mostly unmarked. Okay. This isn't what people wanted. They would wait until the dead of night with their dead relative, wrapped in a shroud, a piece of fabric. They would sneak them into the graveyard and bury them in a shallow grave and hope that nobody noticed.
Wow.
Okay, people were being sneaked into this graveyard very regularly. On top of this, people were being sneaked out. Okay, grave robbing, big problem here. Surgeons' Hall is just a block that way. And Surgeons' Hall were looking to further their knowledge in the field of medicine, in science. But they were only permitted one corpse, one cadaver per month with which to perform their experiments and their studies. And they didn't feel it was enough. So they paid the grave robbers to come in here and steal the dead. The grave robbers would wait on the other side of the wall until nightfall, then they'd make their way in and start digging. They'd know exactly where somebody was buried, nice and fresh. Surgeons' Hall only paid good money for the fresh ones. They'd dig them up with wooden shovels as it was much quieter. Okay, then they'd dig roughly 3 feet by 3 feet straight down, a metre by a metre, and when they hit something more solid, they'd crack open the coffin lid, pulling the person out of the ground. If they got your feet, big toes, pull you straight out. If they got your head, even easier, your nose and mouth are shaped kind of like a bowling ball, straight out of the ground. Okay? It was easy money. Okay, they'd be paid roughly a week's wages anywhere else in a single night for one corpse. It was quick and it was easy. Okay. On top of this, they were not only paid for the dead person, they also helped themselves to any of the jewellery, money, silverware, fine clothing that the people were wearing when they pulled them out of the ground. You hear stories of them desperately trying to pull jewellery from an elderly lady's fingers whose joints had swollen, and in the fight and the struggle to pull her jewellery from her finger, she woke up. She wasn't dead at all. Okay? Medicine was not very good. If you were a deep enough sleeper or you looked dead enough, they'd put you in the ground. They found this out because people were renting coffins at this point in time. It seems a bit wild to us now, but coffins were very expensive. You'd pay for your shroud, your piece of fabric, and you would go inside the coffin. You'd be buried for a number of months. At the end of this time, they'd dig you up, put what's left in a bag, and put that back underground, using the coffin for the next person. This worked fine, but they started digging people up, and they were opening the lids and finding fingernail scratches on the underside of the lids. Okay.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, people being buried, waking up, and fighting desperately to escape, to no avail, dying of starvation or asphyxiation, neither of which are nice ways to go. Okay. In the Victorian era, the rich became very afraid of being buried alive. The Victorians had a kind of fascination with death. Okay, they were frankly completely obsessed with it. What they were doing was being buried with a bell above ground and a string attached to their finger. If they woke up under the ground, they could wiggle their fingers, ring the bell, and somebody would come and dig them up, rescuing them. However, it's quite breezy in Edinburgh, and if all of the bells across the whole graveyard start ringing, the groundskeeper isn't going to want to dig everybody up. So it fell out of practice pretty quick. Okay, but it was a trend in the Victorian era. That's how afraid people were of being buried alive. This is a massive graveyard, not in kind of square footage, but in depth. Did anybody notice the level of the street while we were at the bottom at the Cowgates? Mm-hmm. Yeah? That's the original ground level for all of this section. This used to be a valley. It's now a hill. That's the sheer quantity of the dead buried here. We have no idea how many. Only the rich were added to the burial register. People were added, people were taken away. And the plague visited Edinburgh on a number of occasions, again, at one point killing 50% of the population. People were dying faster than we could bury them, and people were terrified. So they would dig mass graves, mass trenches, and they would place the dead side by side in neat rows. You'll hear stories of people being thrown in, arms and legs everywhere, but it's not the case. It was all very respectful. One by one. Then a thin layer of dirt on the top, and the next layer of the dead. If it was you digging the graves, then it was you next. Okay. Hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people are buried here in plague pits, many of which we still haven't discovered. Okay. So, a mass number of the dead. What we're standing on isn't dirt, it's dead people. And human remains don't behave the same way as regular dirt does when it gets waterlogged. On at least 2 occasions, this entire graveyard has slipped the whole way down the hill into the Cowgate, a river of human sludge. Okay? It made its way all the way down into the Cowgate, and they didn't really know what to do with it. Okay? An entire kirkyard, 2 streets over. Okay? Slipping like a mudslide down the hill. What they did was they loaded the remains into carts, carted it back up here, put a thin layer of dirt and grass over the top, and tried to forget. This happened twice. The second time they built the wall at the bottom, and that's done a much better job of keeping everybody in. Yeah, we like building walls here, okay? The US also. We'll not get into that. So, a mountain of the dead. That's what we're standing on. That kind of place may leave something behind. We're going to head up to the Covenanters prison.